When I read the police report that accompanied him, the first thing I learned was that immediately after killing his wife, Walter had run out of the house and into his car, which he drove straight into a local reservoir in an attempt to drown himself. But the car did not completely submerge, and he climbed out of it and lay collapsed on the bank, where the police found and arrested him. He himself could say practically nothing to me, except to repeat over and over again that he was the greatest sinner who had ever lived, and that he expected to be executed by the state, which he felt he deserved. Indeed, he was frustrated by the fact that his attempt to kill himself had failed. So why had he done something so brutal to his wife and so irreversibly damaging and destructive to everyone else involved? When he became capable of talking coherently within the next few days, he revealed that he had committed this murder on the night of their 20th wedding anniversary. He had hoped that this anniversary would result in a restoration of closeness between himself and his wife, who he felt had become increasingly distant from him over the previous few years. He recalled that he had heard rumors, and others had insinuated to him, that she had attempted to persuade some of the businessmen whose advertisements he needed for the success of his publication to withdraw their support, though he could not understand why she would do this. However, his hopes for a reconciliation were increasing as the evening went on, when she handed him a card to celebrate their anniversary. When he opened it, however, what he discovered was that she had crossed out the repeated phrase, "love is," this or that, and replaced it with, "love was." While he was still struggling with the implications of that emotional body blow, she capped it with the remark, 20 years, what a waste. Because he had allowed himself to imagine that she would love him and to hope for that outcome, he was doubly vulnerable to feelings of shame and humiliation over being so massively rejected. Shamed because of what she did, which was to reject him, but also shamed because of what he had done, which was to make himself vulnerable to her and dependent on her by wanting her to love him, and also foolish and naive enough to expect that she could love him, thus letting himself be deceived and fooled and made a fool of by imagining that she might love him, which he now had to admit was merely wishful thinking and thus foolish on his part. He felt that he had been blind, so out of touch with what her real feelings, or lack of feelings, toward him were, that he had let her deceive and fool him, thus letting her make a fool of him by showing how foolish he was to think that she could consider him worthy of her love. When they went to bed that night, he said, he did not merely feel crushed. He said, "I was drowning in an ocean of hate." He could hardly sleep, and in the middle of the night, only half awake, he impulsively grabbed the leash of the pet dog she loved and strangled her to death with it. But immediately after doing so, he realized what he had done. He had killed the woman he had married and had loved at least enough to want her to love him in return. He could never bring her back to life. She was dead forever. And he had ruined the life of his daughter, who could never recover from the trauma of the fact that her father had murdered her mother. To say merely that he felt guilty would be an understatement. He felt overwhelmingly guilty, the worst sinner who had ever lived, and felt the only thing he deserved was death and damnation. It was not he who ran to his car and drove it into the reservoir to drown himself. It was his guilt feelings that ran him to the car, drove it, and attempted to drown him. I was very familiar with Freud's notion that aggression is caused by an instinct, but that clearly did not explain this case or the others I was seeing. For instincts, to eat, to drink, to reproduce, are universal, whereas both murder and suicide are highly selective and relatively rare behaviors. I searched my mind for any way to understand how someone with so much to live for could do something so unthinkable. And then I realized I had just met Othello.